Hi, my name's Joe Older, and I'm a beer can collector. Have been since 1976. As everybody probably knows, beer can collecting was a very popular hobby back in the 70s. Every kid seemed to have one. I lived on a small 2 block long street, and there were probably 7 or 8 kids on the street that had beer can collections. And I was one of them. And got started in kind of a roundabout way. I was at my really good friend's house and was walking down the hallway of his house, and something caught my eye as I passed by a doorway and looked into a bedroom. And there was this pyramid of beer cans sitting on the floor of this room. And I said, "What is that?" And he said, "Oh, that's my brother's beer can collection." I'd never heard of such a thing. And it just stuck with me for some reason. I didn't really start collecting at that point, but it stuck with me. And uh, sometime later, I can't remember exactly how long, I was out riding my bike around like we did back in those days, and I saw this green beer can, and I thought, well, that's unusual. I've never seen a green beer can. Not that I knew much about beer cans, but green seemed like a weird color to me. So I picked it up and took it to him. He said, "Oh, I have one of those." It was a Genesee Cream Ale, straight steel can, and I took it home and thought, well, maybe I'll just start collecting cans too. And that was my first can. That's how I got started. Uh, I think like the next weekend, a buddy of mine that lived across the street, we took our bikes out, rode all around our little town, picking up cans and brought them back. And I actually have a photo of my collection from that day. I took a photograph of my little like 20 can collection that I still have. I know,
A lot of
but
it
it's a
just,
great story. I
yeah,
mean, it's why would I take a picture of that first day? You know,
right.
the back of the picture says "inauspicious beginnings." I don't know when that was written on there, or who wrote it, but
Yeah. It's,
um, my parents weren't against it, but they weren't super supportive of it. As I think most people, you know, my mom wasn't thrilled about me dragging home dirty, nasty beer cans. Well, my dad, interestingly, my dad worked at a chemical plant. That's what there were a lot of chemical plants around where I grew up, and he would just bring me bags of oxalic acid from the chemical plant. And so I've got oxalic acid cleaning cans but I didn't know, and I don't know why. Maybe he told me, but my other dad didn't say. You know, you need to do this outside and well ventilated, because I was doing it in the bathroom in the house, and I ended up slopping the oxalic acid all over the countertop, the Formica countertop, and destroyed it. And my mom was not happy about that. Not happy about it. I think when they still sold the house, I think it still had that messed up countertop in there. I don't think they ever replaced it. They just kind of covered it up with different things, candles and doilies and things. But it's been a long journey. I mean, I've collected since then. I never quit collecting. I joined the BCCA in 1977, so a year or so later, and have never dropped my membership. I don't know. You know, there were times when I wasn't super active. I thought going to college would be a great time to get beer cans, because you know you're drinking beer all the time, and no, you're drinking beer all the time, so you're not really collecting the cans. But I did actually a report on the Wiedemann Brewing Company while I was in college. We had to write a term paper on something, and I chose that, some business, and I chose that. And so I was able to bring all my cans from Wiedemann, or from, not Wiedemann, Heilemann, I'm sorry. It was Heilemann Brewing Company, because they had been buying up all the smaller brewers at that time in the 70s, and they were pretty large. And they had tremendous number of labels and cans and everything. So I brought all those in from my report that I gave, and I think I ended up getting an A on that paper. Everybody was impressed with all the different cans that they had. And so after college, this was in West Virginia. I went to West Virginia University, and then after college moved to Florida, because there weren't a whole lot of jobs at that time in West Virginia. And got a job down in Jacksonville, and brought my collection with me. And again, it was mainly I would just go to, you know, if I went to a store, I would pick up, you know, something new, some different brand, or an updated version of an older can. And that's really all I did at that time. There were very few shows that I went to, because in West Virginia there weren't any shows. I would occasionally go to a show over in Ohio. They would have a few shows. And then when I got to Jacksonville, I think there was one Gator Trader show that was in Jacksonville, and I went to that one. But I wouldn't travel out of town at the time to, you know, just, I loved it, but I wasn't super passionate about it, I guess. Not enough to travel anyway at that time. Well, then in 1990, I moved to Orlando. I probably had around 1,000 beer cans at that point when I moved to Orlando. And there was a Gator Trader show, and I went to that, and the guy had bought a huge collection, and he was selling thousands and thousands of cans. And it was basically fill up a can tote full of whatever you wanted for like $20. And I was like, wow, I went crazy doing that. Yeah. And it turned out the guy was named Pat Taylor, and he and I became really, really good friends. He was a great guy, super enthusiastic about the hobby, loved everything about it, loved to travel to shows. So he finally talked me into traveling to shows, and I loved that, going to shows and picking up cans, and got into it. But I was still buying currents and new stuff at that point until in my old house, before we built this house, I had a room that had 4,500 cans in it. And it wasn't as big as this room right here. Every wall was lined with shelves, and I even had what I called library shelves that were wider and came out so you could put cans on both sides. But it was like walking, you had to kind of walk narrowly between them because they were so, and it got to the point, and this is even before craft cans became a thing. This is in the 90s. There was so many new cans coming out. There was so much aluminum, and I found, I realized I really like the older cans better than the newer cans. I'm not putting the newer cans down. I think the craft cans are great. I mean, the colors and the graphics and the design is fantastic, and I'm not putting it down. But at some point, you have to say enough is enough, and that's where I decided to draw the line. So I ended up selling off about 800 of the aluminum cans that I had, cut it down, and we built this house, and I put shelves up in here. And not these shelves. These are shelves I got not too long ago. And I probably had 2,600 cans, I think, in here at one time. Anyway, 2,000 anyway. And then, because there was a wall, that was a wall where that opening is right there. People on the line can't see this, but anyway, you can edit it out. But yeah, and it just kept evolving. So I would get newer cans, and I had a lot of tabs at that time, but I really liked flat tops, and the new flat top book came out in 2000. And I was like, oh, this is fantastic. I love this book. And it's like, if it's in the book, I'm going to try to get it. So I would go to shows, and I would just dig through cans and, go to conventions. I started going to conventions, and loved conventions, and, going room to room and doing the trading, and met so many great people. And like I've said before, I think all my best friends are beer can collectors. I've met the greatest people in this hobby. And so it's just been an evolution. I've just slowly, I have very few tabs left, and I've focused on flats. And at one point, then even the book became, that's too many cans. They're in that book, so I had to make a choice. And I had, at one point, I probably had a row and a half of the variations of like Ballantine cans because there's so many of them. And I said, they are different, but they have a very similar look. And I wanted to have variety. So I started selling off, not duplicates, but very similar looking cans, and taking that money and pouring it into other cans that maybe had a different look to them. So I would like the variety, and I like the different graphics on the cans. So that's where I've gotten to today. And it's just been, like I say, an evolution of moving from, at the beginning, I was collecting everything. I had foreign cans, I had 16-ounce cans, I had everything. And, things slowly started, okay, I don't have enough room for those, so I'll get rid of the foreigns. I don't have enough room for those, so I'll get rid of the 16s. And I think everybody goes through some portion of that, some semblance of that. You have to cut it off at some point. You have to decide what I'm going to focus on. Otherwise, unless you have, a 50,000 square foot barn or something that you can line the shelves everywhere and keep everything. And I know a few people that do that, but I think it's fun to have, a nice small, I think there are 1,200 cans in here, something like that now. And that's a good number. So basically now, if I get a new can, something has to go out for the most part. So that's my evolution. And then, and I also, when when I first started, I didn't know anything. Being in West Virginia, the only brewery that closed that canned was Fesenmeyer. Well, they had closed by the time I was collecting, and I did find some of their cans when I would be out scrounging for cans and dumping and that kind of thing. But I didn't know about Breweriana. I was a can collector, so it wasn't until probably in the early 90s I discovered, they actually did some signs and things. West Virginia is a strange state in that their laws were very restrictive even when I was growing up. Technically, there were no bars in West Virginia. Now, a social club could serve alcohol to its members. So, when I was growing up, and I was legal age, I was 18 then. You went to the social club to have a drink, and you had a card for every social club. So your wallet was super thick with all these cards for all these social clubs. You paid $1, you got your card, you could go in and drink at the social club, which was just a bar. But they didn't allow signage. They could not advertise. They could not have lighted signs in the windows and things like that. There were no neons allowed. So until 20 years ago, as I said, there's a group of us from West Virginia that's still real active. There's like 5 or 6 guys that are real active, and they collect West Virginia stuff. There was always a debate, does a West Virginia neon exist? And because no one had ever seen one, and they weren't legal in West Virginia, so we said, well, the only place they could be would be in Ohio or Kentucky, where they also sold beer. So I happened to be on eBay one time, and I have certain searches that I look for, West Virginia, Fesenmeyer, things like that, and this thing popped up that was like a neon repair shop that had closed down, and out behind it was a field of broken neons. And for some reason, the name West Virginia popped up with that ad. The guy had listed it starting at 1 cent, and there were like 160 broken neons or something. And I contacted him and said, I don't want all those broken neons, but apparently there's 2 West Virginia. So he sent me some additional pictures. I scoured the pictures, and I finally saw that there was a West Virginia. I could make it out, and among the weeds, and they were all sitting outside. And I said, look, I would pay good money for that neon. He said, well, there's actually 2 of them. I said, well, I'd buy both of them and pay good. No. What I want to do is find somebody that's going to go into business with me and repair all these neons and then sell them. I was like, I'm thinking, of course, well, good luck with that. I said, well, worst case is I'm going to buy all these neons and I'm going to bring a truck down and take it down. And back to my point was, this was in Ohio. This was at a neon repair shop in Ohio. And the guy, it was actually during a convention when this was scheduled to end. So I'm like trying to get on my computer and check out the auction and what's going on. All of a sudden the auction disappears. But this was in the earlier days of eBay when you could still buyers and sellers could contact each other. And I contacted him and said, hey, what happened? I was prepared to bid on these. He said, well, again, he started the auction at 1 cent. Nobody had bid. Nobody had even bid 1 cent on the thing. And I had been prepared to throw a few $100s at it just to try to win those 2 neons. And I said, well, I'm still interested in those 2 West Virginia ones. Would you sell those? So we came up with a price for the broken neons. And I was in Florida at the time. My father-in-law was still in West Virginia, and he drove over to Ohio and paid the guy and picked them up. And then on a trip down, he brought them down to me. And I ended up having to send them. They were more broken than they appeared to be in the pictures, of course. And I ended up taking them out and having somebody repair them. They had to be completely redone. A lot of breaks in the glass. They had to be patched and all that stuff. So that's one of the neons in there. So so these are the first 2 West Virginia neons that have ever appeared. Then I used to go to the old Blue Gray show up in Fredericksburg, which was a fantastic show, greatest show. I think it's even better than, I don't want to put convention down, but the hotel, the layout and everything, okay, the hotel was a dump, but I mean the layout and everything, it was just so much fun, and so much great stuff showed up there. Well, there was a guy a couple of doors down from where you had your same room every year after year after year. Well, there was a guy a couple of doors down, and he found out I liked West Virginia stuff, so he started bringing. And I'm like, where did you get that? He told me the story. He His name was Bob McClure, and he and a guy named Bob Leslie were can collectors from way, way back. I mean, the very early days. And they were living in Ohio, they had read about the previously Fesenmeyer Brewing Company, which became Little Switzerland for a few years, was shutting down, and they were going to demolish the building. And they were like, I wonder if there's anything left in that building. So they called the auction company that was selling it and said, can we go into the building? Can you imagine that this day and age? And they were like, sure, we'll tell the security guard to let you guys in. Take whatever you want, we're tearing it down. So these guys rented a U-Haul, took it down to the old Fesenmeyer Little Switzerland Brewing Company. The guy let them in. They scavenged through the whole thing, found all kinds of cans, lots of cans. They were can collectors primarily. And that's why you see all those boxes of West Virginia and Charge tabs that don't have a bottom on them, because they were still sitting there stacked up ready to be filled by the brewery when it shut down. Well, they were can collectors, so those were kind of tough cans to get in those early days, because it was a very small regional brewery. And we didn't have the internet back then or anything like that. So those cans are now everywhere. You see them all the time. Those cans are pretty easily obtainable. But anyway, it's because of those two guys finding it. But the other thing they did is they scavenged through the whole brewery. They said they found boxes and boxes of tin over cardboard signs. They would open a box up, they would pull one out, look at it, say, oh, that's kind of neat. They would take one, and they left the box full of tin over cardboard signs, which are extremely valuable now. And I guess it's a good thing they left them all, because maybe they wouldn't be as valuable. But I mean, it would be cool to have more of them around. Hopefully they got one of everything that was there. So I got a bunch of, so this guy, like I say, Bob McClure, kept bringing stuff to me every show. And then one day he goes, look, I got a little bit left. I'm going to bring everything else, and I'm going to sell everything to you that I had left from West Virginia. And he brought in the other neon that I have, the other West Virginia neon, which is different from the first one that I got. And it's the only one known. And it was in the brewery. It had been broken, and they had sent it back to the brewery, and they were supposed to get it repaired, and I guess it never happened, and it just sat in a corner of the brewery. And I, again, had to get that repaired by a neon guy, and that's in there also. So that's the only one now. So I have one of one known, and I have one of two known, the West Virginia neons. This is actually the mock-up. That was, again, the guys found it in the brewery, and they brought it home. So this is a mock-up. This is the production can, this is a mock-up, and you can see subtle differences between the two. So it's got the hop leaf here instead of the Little Switzerland Bell, and the Pilsner wording is a little different. So I have a feeling it's paper. This is paper that they cut and made it into, and it's got a cover over it. But I have a feeling if I opened it up, which I would never do, there's going to be a Fesenmeyer flat top can underneath of this. Okay. So this is the one that you can find for a few dollars. I mean, yeah, pretty much any can show. Many of them don't have bottoms because they were found at the brewery waiting to be filled when the brewery was shut down. This is an early version because it has actually a Fesenmeyer tax stamp on it. So they for some reason it got made upside down. I mean, they put the wrong end on the can. That should be the top. So my dad had been in the Army back in the 40s and early 50s. He went to Korea, but when he was stationed at Fort Leonard Wood, he told me about this beer he used to drink in this spouty can called Glücksteig. And it's like, I was looking in my I didn't have many books to references. Again, there's no internet back then. And I could never find this can. So I'm thinking, maybe he's just, not remembering correctly or something, because I could never find this can, a picture of this can. It was years later where I did get an updated book, and I found the can he was talking about, showed it to him. He said, yeah, that's the can. And then he passed away by this time, but a few years ago, I was reading a story on the Rusty Bunch site from John Cotterman, and he said, oh yeah, we used to dump cans around Fort Leonard Wood, and my dad had told me that they'd go off the base and drink this Glücksteig, and near the woods, and he said, yeah, we dumped in the woods around Fort Leonard Wood, and we found these cans, these Glücksteig cans. I was like, do you have any of those left? He said, well, I've got a really, really rough one. I said, well, I would like to have it just because it's possible my dad drank that beer can. So he sent it to me. I tried to pay him for it. He said, no, that story. You need to have this can. And so he sent it to me. I got it. Again, it's very rough. And those cans, those are, it's a Crown Tainer, and they actually had a paper label on them. So the paper label was gone by this point. So at one point I was able to find a pretty good example of what the can actually looks like. So I do have it on the shelf, what the can would have looked like when my dad drank it, and I have then the actual one that John had dumped near Fort Leonard Wood.